They said kindness was a weakness in the kingdom of Valoria. They said the poor should stay poor and the nobles should remain untouchable. But when 17-year-old Mira knelt beside a dirty, blind beggar and offered him her last cup of water, she had no idea she was about to change the fate of an entire kingdom. The man's hands shook as he accepted the wooden cup. His clothes were torn rags, his face covered in grime, and his milky eyes stared into nothing. The other villagers walked past him like he was invisible, holding their noses and whispering cruel words. But Mira saw something different. She saw pain. She saw dignity. She saw a human being who needed help. "Thank you, child," the beggar whispered, his voice rough like gravel. "Your kindness will not be forgotten." Mira smiled and walked away, thinking nothing more of the encounter. She was just a baker's daughter trying to survive in a world that had forgotten mercy. But the next morning, everything changed. Royal guards surrounded her small cottage, their armor gleaming in the dawnlight. And standing among them was a man she recognized, the same beggar from yesterday. Only now he was clean, dressed in royal robes, and his blind eyes could see perfectly. "My lady," he said, bowing deeply, "allow me to introduce myself. I am King Edmund of Valoria, and you, dear Mira, have just become the most important person in my kingdom." But who was this fallen king, and why had he been wandering the streets as a blind beggar? The truth was darker and more dangerous than anyone could imagine.
Mira had always been different from the other girls in Ashford Village. While they dreamed of marrying merchants or knights, she dreamed of adventure. While they gossiped at the well, she helped her father knead bread before dawn and read old books by candlelight. Her father, Thomas, was the village baker, a kind man with flour-dusted hands and a heart bigger than his small cottage. He had taught Mira everything: how to make bread that could feed a family for days, how to spot honesty in a person's eyes, and most importantly, how to show kindness, even when the world showed you cruelty. "Remember, daughter," he would say every morning, "a person's worth isn't measured by their gold, but by their compassion." This particular morning started like any other. The rooster crowed, the sun painted the sky purple and gold, and Mira carried fresh loaves to the market square. But something felt different in the air. The villagers whispered in hushed tones about strange happenings in the capital city. They spoke of a king who had vanished, of nobles fighting for power, and of dark magic spreading across the land. Mira didn't pay much attention to royal gossip. What did the problems of kings and queens matter to a baker's daughter? She had her own worries, like the fact that fewer people could afford bread each day, or that her father's cough was getting worse, or that Lord Garrett, the cruel tax collector, would be visiting their village soon. As she set up her stall in the market square, she noticed the beggar sitting by the old stone fountain. He was new to Ashford. She had never seen him before. His clothes were little more than rags, his gray hair matted and dirty, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were clouded over, completely white. The man was blind. The other villagers gave him a wide circle, as if poverty was a disease they might catch. Children threw pebbles at him and ran away laughing. Shop owners shooed him away from their stalls. But the blind man sat quietly, never complaining, never begging loudly like others did. He simply held out a cracked wooden bowl, hoping for mercy. Myra watched him all morning. She saw how people treated him, like he was less than human. It made her heart ache. When the sun reached its peak and the heat became unbearable, she noticed the beggar's lips were cracked and dry. He hadn't received a single coin, let alone any water. Without thinking twice, Myra filled her own drinking cup from the fountain and approached him. "Sir," she said gently, kneeling beside him, "would you like some water?" The beggar's head turned toward her voice. Up close, she could see lines of wisdom etched into his weathered face. His hands, though dirty, had the long fingers of someone who had once been accustomed to finer things. "You would give water to a stranger?" he asked, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place. "Everyone needs water, especially on a day this hot." The man accepted the cup with trembling hands. As he drank, Myra noticed something odd, a small scar on his wrist shaped like a crown. But before she could examine it closer, he handed the cup back. "Thank you, child. Your kindness shines brighter than gold. What is your name?" "Myra," she said. "I'm the baker's daughter." The man nodded slowly. "Myra. A beautiful name for a beautiful soul. I will remember this kindness." As the afternoon wore on, Myra couldn't stop thinking about the beggar. Something about him seemed familiar, though she was sure they had never met. When she finally packed up her unsold bread to take home, she left an entire loaf beside him. "For tonight," she said softly. The beggar's blind eyes seemed to look right through her. "You have given more than bread and water today, Myra. You have given hope to a man who had lost it entirely." That night, as Myra helped her father close the bakery, she told him about the encounter. "You did right, daughter," Thomas said, coughing into his apron. "In times like these, kindness is the rarest treasure of all." Neither of them knew that 20 royal guards were already riding hard toward Ashford Village, their torches cutting through the darkness. None of them knew that the beggar Myra had helped was about to turn her simple life upside down. And certainly, none of them could have guessed the incredible secret the blind man had been hiding, a secret that would make Myra the most sought-after person in the entire kingdom.
Dawn broke with the thunder of hooves. Myra woke to her father shaking her gently, his face pale with worry. "There are soldiers outside," he whispered. "Royal guards. They're asking for you." Myra's heart pounded as she dressed quickly and stepped outside their cottage. 20 men in gleaming armor surrounded their small home, their horses pawing the ground impatiently. The villagers had gathered at a safe distance, whispering and pointing. But it wasn't the soldiers that made Myra's breath catch in her throat. It was the man standing beside them. The beggar from yesterday stood before her, but he was transformed. His hair was clean and silver, swept back from a noble face. He wore robes of deep purple trimmed with gold, and a simple crown sat upon his head. Most shocking of all, his blind white eyes were now clear and blue, looking directly at her with perfect vision. "Your Majesty," said one of the guards, bowing, "this is the girl." The king, the beggar, stepped forward. Myra fell to her knees, her mind spinning with confusion and fear. "Please rise," the king said gently. "You showed kindness to a beggar yesterday. You should not kneel before anyone." I don't understand," Myra stammered, getting to her feet. "You were blind. You were poor, helpless, less than human." The king's voice carried a weight of sadness. Yes, that is what I appeared to be, and that is exactly how your people treated me, all except for you." Thomas appeared at Mira's side, his baker's apron still dusted with flour. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "if my daughter has done something wrong—" "Wrong?" laughed the king, but there was no joy in it. "Your daughter is the only person in your village who showed mercy to a stranger. She is the only one who acted with true nobility. Tell me, good baker, how many others offered water to the beggar yesterday?" Thomas looked around at the gathered villagers, shame coloring his cheeks. "None, Your Majesty." "And how many threw stones? How many cursed at him? How many wished he should simply disappear?" The silence that followed was answer enough. The king turned his attention back to Mira. "Let me explain what happened yesterday, brave Mira. 3 months ago, my kingdom was betrayed. From within, my own brother, Prince Marcus, made a deal with the witch of the northern mountains. She cursed me with blindness and poverty, stripping away my sight and my royal appearance. I was cast from my own palace, forced to wander as a beggar, while Marcus took my throne." Mira gasped. "That's horrible! But how are you—" "The curse had one condition," the king continued. "If I could find someone who would show kindness to me as a beggar, true kindness with no expectation of reward, the curse would be broken. For 3 months I wandered through villages across the kingdom. I was spat upon, kicked, ignored, and treated worse than a stray dog. Until yesterday. Until you." The weight of what he was saying hit Mira like a physical blow. "I broke your curse?" "You did more than that," King Edmund said, his voice growing stronger. "You proved that nobility exists not in bloodlines, but in actions. You showed the true royalty lies in compassion, not in crowns." Captain William, the lead guard, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, what are your orders regarding the village?" The king looked around at the gathered crowd, his expression hardening. "The same people who showed cruelty to a helpless stranger, what mercy did they deserve?" Terror rippled through the crowd. Some villagers began to back away. Others fell to their knees begging for forgiveness. But King Edmund raised his hand for silence. "However," he continued, "this village also produced Mira. For her sake, you will all be pardoned. But know this, kindness will be the new law of this land. Those who show cruelty to the helpless will face my justice." He turned back to Mira, his expression softening. "As for you, dear girl, I have a proposition. Your kindness saved not just me, but the entire kingdom. Prince Marcus still sits on my throne, believing me dead or disappeared forever. I need allies I can trust absolutely. Will you help me reclaim what is stolen?" Mira looked at her father, then at the king who had been disguised as a beggar. "How could I possibly help you? I'm just a baker's daughter." "You are far more than that," King Edmund said firmly. "You are someone who does what is right, even when no one is watching. That is the rarest quality in all the world, and I believe the kingdom needs someone like you now more than ever." He gestured to Captain William, who brought forward a small chest. "This is just the beginning of how I intend to repay your kindness. But more than gold, I offer you adventure, purpose, and the chance to help restore justice to our land." As the chest opened, revealing more gold than Mira had ever seen in her life before, she realized her quiet life as a baker's daughter was over forever. But what adventures awaited her at the royal court, And how dangerous would it be to face a false king and a powerful witch? Most importantly, could a simple girl from a small village really help save an entire kingdom?
3 days later, Mira found herself in a world she had only dreamed about. The royal palace of Valoria rose before her like something from a fairy tale, with towers that seemed to touch the clouds and walls that gleamed white in the sunlight. But beneath the beauty, she could sense something dark and wrong. King Edmund had insisted she come to court as his honored guest, though they had agreed to keep his true identity secret for now. To everyone else, he was Lord Edward, a minor noble who had recently returned from a long journey. Mira was to be his ward, a baker's daughter he had taken under his protection. "Remember," Edmund whispered as their carriage approached the palace gates, "Prince Marcus believes he is the rightful king now. He thinks I am dead. We must be very careful about whom we trust." Mira nodded, trying to calm her nervous heart. She wore a beautiful green dress that Edmund had provided, the finest clothing she had ever owned, but she felt like she was wearing a costume in a play she didn't understand. The great throne room took Mira's breath away. Enormous columns stretched up to a painted ceiling that depicted angels and heroes. Tapestries told stories of ancient battles, and stained glass windows cast rainbows across the marble floor. At the far end, on a throne of gold and jewels, sat Prince Marcus. Mira had expected him to look evil, like the villains in old stories. Instead, he was handsome and charming, with dark hair and a ready smile. When Edmund presented her as his ward, Marcus welcomed them both warmly. "Any friend of Lord Edward's is welcome at our court," Marcus said, though Mira noticed his eyes were cold despite his smile. "Tell me, young lady, how did you come to be under his protection?" "I was just a baker's daughter, Your Majesty," Mira said carefully. "Lord Edward saw potential in me and offered to educate me in the ways of court." "How generous," Marcus replied. "And Lord Edward, where exactly did you travel during your long absence from court?" Edmund bowed low. "I wandered far and wide, Your Majesty, seeking wisdom and adventure. The world is full of lessons for those willing to learn them." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Suspicion, perhaps? Or recognition? But he only smiled wider. "Indeed it is. You must tell me all about your travels. Later, in private." As they were shown to their chambers, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The palace servants whispered in corners and avoided eye contact. The nobles at court seemed nervous, always looking over their shoulders, and everywhere there were more guards than seemed necessary. That evening, at the grand feast, Mira sat beside Edmund and observed the court. The food was richer than anything she had ever tasted, but she had no appetite. Something was very wrong here. "Lord Edward," a lady at the table said sweetly, "you've been away so long, you must not have heard about our beloved king's tragic fate." "Tragic fate?" Edmund asked, though Mira could hear the tension in his voice. "Oh yes," the lady continued, "King Edmund vanished 3 months ago. Some say he was murdered by bandits. Others believe he simply abandoned his duties. Either way, Prince Marcus has been a wonderful ruler in his absence." "Wonderful indeed," murmured Edmund. As the feast continued, Mira noticed a young woman about her own age sitting at a far table. The girl had auburn hair and intelligent green eyes, and she kept glancing their way with obvious curiosity. When their eyes met, the girl smiled and made a small gesture toward a side door. "Excuse me," Mira whispered to Edmund. "I need some air." She slipped away from the feast and found the auburn-haired girl waiting in a small garden outside. "You're the baker's daughter," the girl said without preamble. "The one Lord Edward brought to court." "Yes," Mira replied cautiously. "And you are?" "Lady Catherine, daughter of Duke William, but you can call me Cat." The girl stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I know who Lord Edward really is." Mira's heart nearly stopped. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Cat's eyes sparkled with excitement and danger. "He's King Edmund, the real king. I recognized him the moment he walked into the throne room, despite his changes. How could you possibly? Because I was in love with him. Before the curse, before everything went wrong. I know his voice, his mannerisms, the way he holds his shoulders when he's thinking. The question is, are you here to help him reclaim his throne?" Mira studied the young woman's face, trying to decide if she could be trusted. Finally, she nodded. "We are, but it's dangerous. Prince Marcus has powerful allies. More dangerous than you know," Cat said grimly. "The Witches of the Northern Mountains doesn't just visit the court, she practically lives here now. She's Marcus's chief advisor, and her magic grows stronger every day. Worse, she's been recruiting people to her cause, people who were once loyal to Edmund." "How do we know you're not one of them?" Mira asked. Cat smiled sadly. "Because if I were, you would already be dead. The witch has ways of dealing with threats to Marcus's power. People who ask too many questions tend to disappear in the night." A chill ran down Mira's spine. "What do you suggest we do?" "First, we need to find out exactly how many people remain loyal to the true king. Second, we need to learn the source of the witch's power. And third," Cat's expression grew determined, "we need to stay alive long enough to make a plan." As if summoned by their words, a dark shadow passed overhead. Both girls looked up to see a large raven circling above them, its red eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "The witch's spy," Cat whispered. "We've been seen. You need to get back to the feast now." As Mira hurried back toward the palace, her mind raced with new fears. They had barely arrived at court, and already their secret might be discovered. How could they hope to outmaneuver a witch and her spies? But more importantly, how many other people at court were not what they seemed to be?
The next morning brought troubling news. 2 servants had disappeared during the night, simply vanished from their beds without a trace. The official explanation was that they had stolen silver and fled, but the whispers throughout the palace told a different story. "They asked too many questions about the old king," Edmund confided to Mira as they walked through the palace gardens. Cat was right. The witch eliminates anyone who might pose a threat. Mira shivered, despite the warm morning sun. "How do we fight someone with that kind of power?" "Carefully," Edmund replied, "and with allies we can trust absolutely." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain William, who had been posing as a common guard since their arrival. "Your Majesty," he said, quietly, making sure no one else could hear. "I've been listening to the guards' gossip. There's going to be a ceremony tonight. Prince Marcus plans to officially crown himself king, claiming that Edmund is dead." Edmund's jaw tightened. "So soon? He's moving faster than I expected." "There's more," William continued. "Lady Catherine sent word. She wants to meet with both of you tonight, after the ceremony. She says she's discovered something important about the witch's power. That evening, the great hall was transformed for Marcus's coronation. Hundreds of nobles, merchants, and foreign dignitaries filled every available space. The Archbishop of Valoria, looking uncomfortable but resigned, waited beside the throne with the true crown of kings. Mira and Edmund watched from the back of the hall as Marcus made his grand entrance. He wore elaborate robes of gold and red, and his smile was triumphant. But it was the woman walking beside him that made Mira's blood run cold. The witch of the northern mountains was beautiful in a terrifying way. Her long black hair seemed to move with a life of its own, and her pale skin looked like porcelain that might crack at any moment. When she smiled, her teeth were too white, too sharp. But it was her eyes that were most unsettling. They were completely black, like looking into an endless void. "People of Valoria," Marcus announced as he stepped onto the platform. "Tonight marks a new era for our kingdom. For too long we suffered under a weak and selfish king who abandoned his duties. Tonight I take the crown not from ambition, but from necessity. I will be the strong leader our kingdom needs." The crowd cheered, but Mira noticed how many of the cheers seemed forced. Fear, not joy, filled most faces in the audience. As the Archbishop reluctantly began the coronation ceremony, the witch stepped forward. "Before we crown our new king," she said, her voice carrying unnaturally throughout the huge hall, "let us make sure no pretenders remain to challenge his rule." She raised her hands, and dark energy swirled around her fingers. "If any person here bears loyalty to the false King Edmund, let them reveal themselves now. My magic will find them regardless."
The hall fell dead silent. Mira felt Edmund tense beside her, his hand moving to the sword hidden beneath his cloak. Around them, she could see other faces pale with fear. How many people in this room were secretly loyal to the true king? The witch's magic spread through the crowd like invisible fog. Several people began to glow with a faint blue light, markers of loyalty to Edmund. To Mira's horror, she realized she was glowing too. "Interesting," the witch purred, her black eyes scanning the marked individuals. "It seems we have more traitors than expected." Guards began moving through the crowd, seizing anyone who glowed with the telltale light. An elderly lord tried to run and was tackled near the doors. A young knight drew his sword, but was quickly overwhelmed. One by one, Edmund's secret supporters were being captured. "We have to go," Edmund whispered urgently, "now, while there's still chaos." But as they tried to slip toward a side exit, a guard spotted Edmund's glowing form. "You there, stop!" Edmund threw back his cloak, revealing his sword. "I am King Edmund of Valoria, and I have returned to reclaim my throne." The hall erupted into chaos. Some people screamed and ran for the exits. Others drew weapons and prepared to fight. And on the platform, Prince Marcus laughed with delight. "Brother," Marcus called out, "how wonderful that you've survived. I was so hoping we could have this conversation face to face." The witch's black eyes fixed on Edmund, and her smile became predatory. "The curse breaker returns, but you're too late, dear king. Your kingdom belongs to us now." As guards surrounded them from all sides, Mira realized they had walked directly into a trap. The witch had known they were coming all along. The coronation, the magic detection, it had all been designed to flush out Edmund and his supporters. But as steel rang against steel and magic crackled through the air, Mira remembered something Cat had said about finding the source of the witch's power. If they could discover that secret, maybe they could still turn the tide. The question was, could they survive long enough to find it?
Steel clashed against steel as the throne room erupted into battle. Edmund fought with the skill of a true king, his sword flashing in the torchlight as he cut down guards who had once served him. But they were vastly outnumbered, and more soldiers poured into the hall with every passing moment. "This way," a voice called from behind them. Cat appeared at a hidden door in the wall, her green eyes blazing with urgency. "Quickly, before they surround us!" Edmund grabbed Mira's hand, and they fought their way toward the secret passage, Captain William and a handful of loyal knights covering their retreat. The witch's dark magic lashed out like lightning, scorching the marble floor where they had stood just moments before. "You cannot run forever, false king," the witch shrieked. "My power reaches every corner of this realm." They plunged into the hidden passage just as the door slammed shut behind them. The narrow tunnel was pitch black and smelled of old stone and secrets. Cat led them through a maze of passages that seemed to have been carved directly into the castle's foundation. "Where does this lead?" Mira gasped, trying to keep up. "The old dungeons," Cat replied, "but not the ones Marcus knows about. These are much older, from when the castle was first built, perfect for hiding rebels and planning resistance." After what felt like hours of running through the dark tunnels, they finally emerged into a large underground chamber lit by dozens of candles. Mira's eyes widened in amazement. At least 50 people were gathered here, knights, servants, nobles, and common folk, all united by their loyalty to the true king. "Your Majesty," an old knight stepped forward and knelt. "We feared you were truly dead." Edmund helped the man to his feet. "Rise, Sir Geoffrey. It will take more than a witch's curse to destroy the rightful king of Valoria." As the crowd of loyal supporters pressed forward to greet their returned king, Cat pulled Mira aside. "While you were at the feast, I discovered something crucial about the witch's power. Follow me." She led Mira to a corner of the chamber where ancient books and scrolls were spread across a stone table. "I've been researching the Witch of the Northern Mountains for months. Her real name is Morgatha, and she wasn't always evil." "What do you mean?" Mira asked, studying the faded illustrations in the old books. 300 years ago, she was actually a healer, one of the most powerful and benevolent magic users in the kingdom. But something changed her, something that gave her the dark power she has now.
Cat opened an ancient tome to a page showing a beautiful woman holding a glowing crystal. This is what she looked like before her transformation. And this, she pointed to the crystal, is the source of her power. It's called the Heart of Shadows. Mira leaned closer to examine the illustration. The crystal was black as midnight, but seemed to pulse with inner light. What does it do? It feeds on negative emotions, fear, hatred, despair, cruelty. The more suffering it absorbs, the more powerful it becomes. That's why Morgatha has been encouraging Marcus to be such a harsh ruler. Every act of cruelty, every moment of the people's despair makes her stronger. The implications hit Mira like a physical blow. So when people treated Edmund cruelly while he was disguised as a beggar, they were feeding the crystal's power, yes. But when you showed him kindness, you did something the crystal couldn't absorb. You weakened it, even if just slightly. Cat's eyes sparkled with hope. That's why the curse broke. Kindness is like poison to the heart of shadows. Across the chamber, Edmund was organizing his supporters into groups. Some would gather intelligence from within the palace. Others would spread word of his return to loyal citizens throughout the kingdom. But Mira's attention remained fixed on the ancient book. "Cat," she said slowly, "if kindness weakens the crystal, what would happen if we could find a way to flood it with acts of compassion and love?" Cat's eyes widened with understanding. "It might destroy the crystal entirely, which would strip Morgartha of her dark powers and make her vulnerable. But how could we possibly—" "Ladies," Edmund appeared beside them, having overheard the last part of their conversation. "You're talking about something very dangerous. Even if we could destroy the Heart of Shadows, Morgartha would still be a formidable enemy." Sir Geoffrey joined their conversation. "Your Majesty, the crystal is kept in the Witch's Tower, the highest point of the castle. It's guarded by creatures of shadow and protected by spells that would kill anyone who tries to approach it." "Then we need a plan that doesn't involve approaching it directly," Mira said thoughtfully. "What if we could turn the entire kingdom against Marcus and Morgartha? What if we could inspire so many acts of kindness and rebellion that the crystal couldn't absorb enough negativity to sustain itself?" Edmund studied her face carefully. "That would require revealing myself to the entire kingdom. It would mean open war between my supporters and Marcus's forces." "Yes," Mira agreed, "but it would also give us a chance to save everyone, not just reclaim your throne." As they talked deep into the night, planning their desperate gambit, none of them noticed the small shadow that detached itself from the wall and slithered away through a crack in the stone. The witch's spies were everywhere, and their secret meeting had not been unobserved. The witch now knew about their plan to destroy the Heart of Shadows. The question was, would she act to stop them, or would she lay an even more cunning trap?
Dawn brought disturbing news to the underground chamber. Captain William returned from a scouting mission with reports that made everyone's blood run cold. "They've started the executions," he reported grimly. "Every person who glowed with loyalty magic last night, they're being hanged in the town square as traitors to the crown." Edmund's face went white with rage and grief. "How many?" 12 so far, with more scheduled for today. Marcus is calling it a cleansing of the realm. The witch stands beside him at every execution, and I swear the crystal around her neck grows brighter with each death." Mira felt sick. Innocent people were dying because they had remained loyal to their true king. The Heart of Shadows was indeed feeding on their suffering, growing stronger with every act of cruelty. "We can't wait any longer," she said firmly. "We have to act now, before more people die." Edmund nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Then we begin the uprising today. Sir Geoffrey, send messengers to every village and town in the kingdom. Tell them their true king has returned and call them to rebellion against the usurper." "But Your Majesty," Sir Geoffrey protested, "we don't have enough weapons or soldiers to fight Marcus's army." "We're not going to fight them with swords. We're going to fight them with something far more powerful, the truth." Over the next few hours, the hidden chamber became a center of frantic activity. Loyal servants slipped back into the castle to spread word of Edmund's return. Messengers rode out to distant villages carrying calls for peaceful resistance. And Cat worked with a group of scholars to copy leaflets explaining the truth about the witch's power. Remember, Edmund told each group as they prepared for their missions, "We're not just trying to reclaim a throne, we're trying to save the very soul of our kingdom. Every act of kindness you inspire, every moment of hope you create, weakens our enemy's power." Mira found herself assigned to the most dangerous mission of all, returning to the villages around her hometown to organize the common people. "They'll listen to you," Edmund explained. "You're one of them. You understand their fears and their hopes." As she prepared to leave the hidden chamber, Kat pressed a small pendant into her hand. "This will glow warm when you're near someone you can trust absolutely, and cold when you're in danger. It's old magic, the kind that existed before the witch corrupted it."
The pendant felt warm in Mira's palm, and when she looked up, she saw Edmund watching her with an expression of deep concern mixed with admiration. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Once you leave this chamber, you'll be completely on your own. If Morgatha's forces catch you—" "They won't," Mira said with more confidence than she felt. "Besides, someone has to rally the people, and someone has to make sure they understand that this is about more than just changing kings. It's about choosing what kind of kingdom we want to live in." 3 days later, Mira stood in the market square of Ashford Village, the same place where she had first met the disguised king. But now, instead of selling bread, she was selling hope. "Citizens of Ashford," she called out, standing on the same stone fountain where the beggar had sat. "You know me. I'm Thomas the baker's daughter. 3 days ago, I discovered something that will change everything we believe about our kingdom." A crowd gathered, curious and nervous. Her father stood at the edge of the group, pride and worry warring in his expression. The same villagers who had ignored the blind beggar now listened as his story unfolded from Mira's lips. "The man you mocked, the beggar you scorned, he was your true king, cursed by dark magic and testing our hearts. Most of us failed that test, but it's not too late to make things right." As she spoke, the pendant around her neck grew warm, indicating the presence of people she could trust. But she also noticed it growing cold whenever certain villagers drew near, people whose loyalty had been balked or coerced by Marcus's agents. By evening, half the village had pledged to join the peaceful rebellion. They would refuse to pay Marcus's crushing taxes, would hide any royal guards who remained loyal to Edmund, and would spread the truth to neighboring communities. But as Mira prepared to move on to the next village, her father pulled her aside. "Daughter," he said quietly, "there are riders coming, royal soldiers, at least 20 of them. Someone betrayed your location." Mira's pendant had grown ice cold, confirming her father's warning. "I have to run." "Not alone," Thomas said firmly. "Half the village is ready to protect you. The other half, well, fear makes cowards of good people." As the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, Mira realized that her mission had become more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Marcus and the witch weren't just trying to maintain power. They were actively hunting down anyone who dared to speak the truth. But across the kingdom, similar scenes were playing out in hundreds of villages and towns. The word was spreading faster than Marcus's soldiers could travel. For the first time in months, people were choosing hope over fear, kindness over cruelty. The question was whether their rebellion could grow strong enough, fast enough, to weaken the heart of shadows before Morgatha crushed it entirely, and whether Mira could survive long enough to see if their desperate plan would work.
The royal soldiers found Ashford Village empty, except for flickering candlelight in windows and the distant echo of Mira's voice calling from the forest beyond.
She's leading them away from the village, Thomas whispered to his neighbors as they watched from hidden spots. My brave daughter is protecting us all. But Mira wasn't just running, she was completing her mission. As she moved through the dark woods, using paths she had known since childhood, she spread the word to hidden settlements and remote farms. By dawn, 3 more villages had joined the rebellion. The pendant around her neck had saved her life twice during the night, growing cold just in time to warn her of ambushes. But it also revealed something wonderful. Everywhere she went, she found people whose hearts glowed warm with loyalty to the true king and hope for a better future. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Morgatha stood in her towered chamber, staring at the heart of shadows with growing alarm. The crystal, which had been pulsing with dark energy for months, was beginning to flicker and dim. "What is happening?" Prince Marcus demanded, pacing nervously behind her. "Your magic is supposed to be getting stronger, not weaker." "Someone is spreading kindness faster than we can spread fear," she hissed, her black eyes reflecting the crystal's dying light. Wave her hand over a dark mirror, and images appeared showing scenes from across the kingdom. In village after village, people were performing acts of defiance and compassion. Farmers were sharing their grain with hungry neighbors instead of hoarding it in fear. Merchants were refusing to collect Marcus's cruel taxes. Children were leaving flowers at the sites where loyal citizens had been executed. "Every act of kindness weakens my power," she admitted, her beautiful face twisting with rage. "We need to do something dramatic, something so terrifying that it crushes their hope entirely." Marcus nodded eagerly. "What do you suggest?" "We kill the girl, the baker's daughter who started all of this, but not quietly, publicly, brutally, in a way that breaks the spirit of everyone who dares to follow her example." That night, as Mira slept in a hidden cave deep in the forest, she was awakened by the sound of horses and torches. But these weren't Marcus's soldiers. They were Edmund's loyal knights, led by Captain William.
"My lady," William said urgently, "you need to come with us immediately. The king requires your presence at the castle." "Has something gone wrong with the plan?" Mira asked, gathering her few belongings. "On the contrary," William smiled grimly. "Your work has been too successful. The witch's power is weakening faster than we dared hope. But that also makes this the most dangerous moment of all. A cornered enemy is always the most vicious." As they rode through the pre-dawn darkness toward the castle, William explained what had been happening. Reports were coming in from across the kingdom. Marcus's tax collectors were being turned away by entire towns. His soldiers were deserting to join Edmund's cause. And most importantly, acts of kindness and rebellion were spreading like wildfire. The Heart of Shadows is losing power so quickly that Morgatha is becoming desperate. Our spies in the castle report that she's planning something terrible, a final devastating blow to crush the rebellion once and for all. They reached the hidden entrance to the underground chamber just as the sun was rising. Inside, Mira found a scene of controlled chaos. Edmund stood before a great table covered with maps and reports, surrounded by dozens of supporters who had arrived during the night. "Mira," he called out when he saw her, "your mission succeeded beyond our wildest dreams. Look at this." He showed her a map of the kingdom dotted with hundreds of small flags. Every flag represents a community that has joined our cause. In 5 days, you and the other messengers have turned half the kingdom against Marcus and the witch. But Edmund's expression was troubled despite the good news. However, Kat's intelligence network has uncovered Morgatha's plan for retaliation. She intends to capture you publicly and execute you in the most brutal way possible, hoping to terrify the people back into submission. Then we don't give her the chance, Mira said firmly. We strike first, tonight, while her power is at its weakest. Kat stepped forward, her face pale but determined. I've been studying the ancient texts all week. I think I know how to destroy the Heart of Shadows completely. But it would require someone to get very close to it, close enough to touch it. That's suicide, Sir Geoffrey protested. The crystal is protected by shadow creatures and deadly spells.
Not if the crystal is weak enough, Kat insisted. And not if the person approaching it carries something the crystal cannot corrupt. She pulled out a small vial filled with what looked like liquid starlight. This is water from the sacred spring, the same spring that supplies the fountain where Mira first showed kindness to the disguised king. If someone could pour this on the Heart of Shadows while it's already weakened by all the kindness spreading across the kingdom, it might shatter completely, Edmund finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. I'll do it, Mira said without hesitation. Absolutely not, Edmund replied immediately. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for my throne. It's not about your throne anymore, Mira said quietly. It's about saving everyone. The people suffering under Marcus's cruelty, the children growing up in fear, the future of the entire kingdom. Someone has to take the risk. As they argued, none of them noticed the small shadow that had been listening from a crack in the wall. By the time they finalized their plan for infiltrating the witch's tower that night, Morgatha already knew they were coming. The trap was set. The final battle between kindness and cruelty, hope and despair would begin at midnight. But who would emerge victorious when the Heart of Shadows finally faced its greatest test? Midnight approached like a storm cloud gathering over the castle. Mira crouched in the shadows of the witch's tower, the vial of sacred spring water clutched in her trembling hands. Far below, she could see Edmund and his loyal knights creating a distraction in the courtyard, drawing guards away from the tower. The plan was simple in theory, but deadly in execution. Kat had discovered that the tower's magical defenses were powered by the Heart of Shadows itself. As the crystal weakened, so did the protective spells around it. But they had to move quickly. Morgatha would soon realize what was happening. Mira began climbing the tower's ancient stone walls, using handholds and ledges that had been carved centuries ago. The pendant around her neck was neither warm nor cold, just neutral, which Kat had told her meant she was walking into a situation where trust and danger were perfectly balanced. As she climbed higher, she could hear sounds of battle from the courtyard below. Edmund's voice rang out clearly. I am Edmund, rightful king of Valoria. I have returned to reclaim what was stolen.
The responding clash of steel and shouts of men told her the final battle had begun. But her focus had to remain on the tower, on the crystal, on the task that could end this war before it truly started. She reached the tower window just as a terrible scream echoed from within. Through the glass, she could see Morgatha standing over a dark mirror, her beautiful face twisted with rage. The Heart of Shadows swung around her neck, but instead of pulsing with power, it flickered weakly like a dying candle. How dare they? Morgatha shrieked at the mirror. How dare these peasants think their pathetic kindness can defeat me? She raised her hands, and dark energy swirled around her fingers. But the magic sputtered and died, too weak to maintain its form. The crystal was failing, just as Kat had predicted. Mira carefully opened the window and slipped inside the tower chamber. The room was filled with horrible things. Cages containing shadow creatures, shelves lined with bottles of nightmare and despair, and walls covered with dark spells written in languages that hurt to look at. But it was the crystal itself that made her breath catch. The Heart of Shadows was beautiful and terrible at the same time,
black as midnight, but shot through with veins of pulsing red light. Even weakened, she could feel its malevolent presence pressing against her mind, trying to fill her thoughts with fear and hatred. "You came," Morgotha said without turning around. "I was wondering when the little baker's daughter would try her heroic rescue." Mira's heart sank. She had walked directly into a trap. Morgotha turned slowly, her black eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "Did you really think I didn't know about your plan? My spies are everywhere, child. I've been waiting for you." "Then why haven't you stopped me?" Mira asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Because I want you to try," Morgotha smiled, showing those two sharp teeth. "I want you to get close to my crystal. I want you to touch it with your precious sacred water." She gestured to the heart of shadows hanging around her neck. "You see, the crystal doesn't just absorb negative emotions, it can also corrupt positive ones. The moment you touch it with that water, it will turn your kindness into cruelty, your compassion into hatred. You'll become my most powerful servant, and your transformation will be broadcast to every rebel in the kingdom. Imagine how their hope will crumble when they see their pure-hearted hero becoming a monster." Mira felt despair rising in her chest, but then she remembered something her father had taught her long ago. A person's worth isn't measured by their gold, but by their compassion.
"You're wrong," she said, stepping closer to the witch. "Kindness isn't something that can be corrupted. It's not a feeling or an emotion. It's a choice. And I choose to be kind no matter what your crystal does to me." Morgotha's confident smile faltered slightly. "Impossible. No one is that pure." "I'm not pure," Mira admitted. "I get scared, I get angry, I make mistakes. But I choose to help others anyway. I choose to see the best in people anyway. I choose to hope anyway." She pulled the cork from the vial of sacred water, and the liquid inside began to glow with soft, white light. "That choice, that's what you can never understand," Mira continued. "It's not about being perfect. It's about trying to be better every single day, no matter how hard it gets." The heart of shadows began to pulse erratically, as if responding to her words. Morgotha stumbled backward, her face pale with sudden fear. "No, this isn't possible. My crystal has never failed before." "Because you've never faced someone who understands what real strength is," Mira said, raising the vial. "Real strength isn't the power to hurt others. It's the courage to help them, even when it's dangerous." She threw the sacred water directly onto the heart of shadows. The crystal screamed. It was a sound unlike anything Mira had ever heard, the wail of every cruel act, every moment of despair, every instance of hatred that had ever fed its dark power. The chamber filled with blinding light as the crystal began to crack and shatter. Morgotha fell to her knees, her dark magic unraveling around her. Her perfect, terrible beauty began to fade, revealing the broken, bitter woman she had become over centuries of feeding on others' pain. But as the light died and the crystal fragments scattered across the floor, Morgotha looked up at Mira with eyes that were no longer black, but simply human. "I remember," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I remember who I used to be before the darkness. I was a healer once. I helped people." And in that moment, Mira realized that the crystal's destruction had done more than free the kingdom from evil. It had freed Morgotha from the corruption that had consumed her soul. The sounds of battle from the courtyard had stopped. Through the window, Mira could see Edmund standing victorious, the false crown removed from Marcus's head. The rebellion had succeeded. But more than that, the very heart of evil in their kingdom had been transformed back into something capable of good. As dawn broke over the castle, painting everything in shades of gold and hope, Mira understood that she had witnessed something miraculous. Not just the defeat of a villain, but the redemption of someone who had lost her way in the darkness. The kingdom was saved. But more than that, it was renewed.
1 year later, Mira stood once again in the market square of Ashford Village. But this time, she wasn't fleeing from soldiers or rallying rebels. She was simply helping her father sell bread, just as she had done for years before her great adventure began. The kingdom had indeed been transformed. King Edmund ruled with wisdom and compassion, guided by the lessons he had learned during his time as a beggar. Prince Marcus, stripped of his false crown and the witch's influence, had begged forgiveness and was slowly earning redemption through service to the people he had once oppressed. Most remarkably, Morgatha, now calling herself by her true name, Elena, had established a school for young healers, teaching them to use magic for helping rather than harming. The woman who had once been the kingdom's greatest threat had become one of its most valuable protectors. Lost in thought again, Kat approached the bread stall, her green eyes sparkling with amusement. She had become Edmund's chief advisor and was widely considered the wisest person at court. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Mira replied, wrapping a fresh loaf for a customer. "Sometimes it feels like a dream." "The best kind of dream," Edmund said, appearing beside Kat. Despite being king, he made a point of visiting every village in his kingdom regularly, listening to his people's concerns and needs. The kind that becomes reality through courage and kindness. He looked around the bustling market square, where vendors and customers of all social classes mingled freely, where children played without fear, and where the stone fountain, the same one where a disguised king had once sat as a beggar, now bore a simple inscription: "Kindness is the truest nobility." "You know," Edmund said thoughtfully, "historians will probably write books about our adventure. They'll call it the story of how a fallen king reclaimed his throne." "But that's not really what happened, is it?"
Edmund smiled. "No, it's the story of how a baker's daughter saved a kingdom by remembering that every person deserves compassion. It's the story of how kindness proved stronger than cruelty, hope more powerful than fear." As the afternoon sun began to set, painting the village in shades of gold, Mira reflected on the incredible journey that had started with a simple cup of water offered to a stranger in need. She had learned that true nobility had nothing to do with crowns or castles, and everything to do with the choices people made every single day. The kingdom of Valoria was at peace, not because a king had reclaimed his throne, but because its people had reclaimed their compassion. And in market squares and village streets, in castle halls and humble cottages, that compassion continued to grow and spread, ensuring that the darkness could never return. After all, kindness, once chosen, has a way of multiplying until it touches every heart and transforms every life it encounters. In a world that often tells us that power comes from wealth, strength, or cunning, this story reminds us of a profound truth. the greatest power of all lies in simple human kindness. Mira, an ordinary baker's daughter, changed the fate of an entire kingdom not through magic or might, but through the choice to see dignity in a stranger's suffering and respond with compassion. The heart of shadows could feed on cruelty, hatred, and despair, because these emotions, while powerful, ultimately consume and destroy. But kindness, true kindness, cannot be corrupted or conquered, because it grows stronger when shared and multiplies when practiced. It is the one force in the universe that creates more of itself by being given away. Every day we encounter our own blind beggars, people who are overlooked, dismissed, or treated as less than human. How we respond in those moments defines not just their day, but the very essence of who we are. For in the end, we are not measured by what we accumulate for ourselves, but by what we freely give to others, especially when they cannot repay us. True nobility is not inherited. It is chosen, one act of compassion at a time.